All right. So this is video 2 of competition and the discussion of top competition for RSM 308, recreational sport programming. And we're finishing up here talking about direct competition. In particular, we're looking at zero-sum games where the sum of the winners and losers equals 1 or equals 0. So one winner, one loser, 1 minus 1 equals 0, right? In softball leagues, we said, throughout the season, each game is a zero sum. But at the end, there's going to be more losers than winners, right? You're going to have one team that's a champion and all the rest are not. So the other thing here we keep in mind are negative sum games. In negative sum games, think of it as games where the winners and losers, basically, it comes out to a negative. There's losses, no matter who wins. Okay, and a lot of times this is those competition-like gambling activities. When you gamble, okay, who always comes out on top? It's the house, right? The house always wins. Well, you're sitting around the blackjack table. You're competing against those other people, but you're also competing against, or poker is a better example. You're competing against all those other players around the table, but the house is still going to come up as a winner. One person's probably going to win more money, but in the end, it's going to come out as a loss for most. So it becomes a negative sum games. Couple other things to think about with competition is over-justification effect. And the over-justification effect is an overabundance of rules, structure, or external payoffs. So a lot more extrinsic, a lot of structure, a lot of guidelines, rules. You think about when you first started competing in activities. A lot of times when you went out and played with friends, you kind of made up your own rules, and you kind of let things happen organically. You kind of just went along and played, and if you needed to throw in a rule, you threw in a rule. I used to love the old comic Calvin and Hobbes, the boy with his imaginary tiger, and they would just compete in different activities, and they kind of took the shape of traditional sport, but then they threw in all these crazy rules that they played with, and they added them in as they went. And you see that a lot with kids. But what happens is we're seeing over-structure occurring down at the lower levels, basically so that there's that can be that external payoff. We can crown the champion, and we know who the best is, and even though that's really not what those lower level leagues should be about. All right. So moving away from that intrinsic motivation, playing for the sole purpose of the activity itself and the sheer enjoyment of the game itself, and moving towards that extrinsic motivation, playing primarily for the payoff, that external payoff that happens, where you're getting medal, trophy, recognition for the win, rather than just for the sheer enjoyment of participating in it. And you kind of see it. There used to be, and I couldn't find it, an old commercial where there were two guys bored in the office, and they were just throwing pieces of paper against a bookshelf, an empty bookshelf, and trying to get it to land on the different shelves. And I used to, that's kind of okay. We're starting with boredom. We're playing. We're just throwing the paper. But what traditionally happens whenever you have two people, what's going to happen? They're going to start competing. All right, and I can just, in my mind, I was sitting there going, okay, I can see these guys evolving into, all right, if the paper stays on this shelf, that's a single. If it stays on this shelf, it's a double. If it goes onto that shelf, it's a triple. And a home run is this shelf, the hardest one to get to. Okay, and you play, basically all of a sudden it's evolved with rules, and you're playing a game that has more structure than just throwing paper against the shelf. It becomes over justification. We get more rules, get more structure, so we can see who actually is the winner rather than just the fun of playing it for sheer enjoyment of playing it. And that kind of leads us into indirect competition. And indirect competition is utilizing past performance as a criterion or a measurement to see how successful we are. Okay? So utilizing past performance as a criterion to evaluate current performance. So, sometimes you have tried to learn a skill, and you try and try over and over again, and you started out not being able to do it, and all of a sudden you can get it, and you got it. That's kind of this indirect competition. Who are you competing with? Well, you're really competing with yourself. You're really challenging yourself to get better. And that's where we get this indirect competition. Okay? It allows us to have that positive sum winning because nobody's losing. There's only a winner, right? Winning is the outcome of the performance. We're getting better. We're improving. Okay? And so we can have that positive sum game. Golf, rather than competing against your friends and going out and keeping score, you're going out trying to make good shots and trying to improve your swing, okay, without that comparison of scores. Skateboarder who masters that new trick. My daughter's big into gymnastics and just trying to compete against herself to try to get that better score than what she did in the past, or trying to get that new skill that she's trying to get. Me with my half marathons, I'm always trying to decrease my time and challenge myself to see less time to take to run the race than what it was before. Because in most cases, if I focus on winning and losing in a traditional standpoint, I'm always going to lose. I mean, there's going to be one winner and 150, 200, 300,000 losers. Okay? But what keeps you going? That challenge to get better at yourself and challenge that indirect competition of trying to compete within myself to get my times better. Okay? And this little diagram, kind of how does competition kind of evolve? And so part of it over here on the left-hand side is how we design our activities and our events. Okay? So what's the norms, the group norms and values? Okay? Is winning or losing what's most important? Okay? Or is it getting better and improving? How do we design that environment that we create for our participants? Are we trying to help them improve, or are we just focusing on winning? Now, sometimes that can go hand in hand, but we will constantly want them to get better. If it's just about winning, what sometimes happens is people, okay, I'm winning, I don't have to get any better because nobody can beat me. Okay? And with children, that hurts because eventually people will catch up. Okay? And I've seen some of my son's friends who had a lot of physical skills at the beginning and jumped way ahead, and then never really worked at them and never tried to improve. And now all of a sudden people are passing them. They were winning, but now they're kind of shifted back into not as being as successful because they didn't work. They didn't have to work because the focus was on winning and not improving. The time and the context factors. So, what's the way that it's set up time-wise, the way it's set up contextually, whether it's about winning, about skill development, improvement, learning, how do you set it up to be successful there? The person, and inside the person, that's what that box is. This, again, my graphics aren't great, but hopefully you can understand. So that sport environment impacts the person. And the person here is, how competitive is that person? We all have that competitive spirit. Some people more so than others. Some people have no competitive spirit, and that's okay. That's what makes them them. Okay. Others, it's overdone, and they do anything to win, and that's where we get into some problems as well. But what's the focus? Well, what's the game orientation? What's the goal orientation? What's the win orientation? Is it about winning? Is it about just participating in the game? Is it about the goal and getting better? Comes from within the individual. And who impacts that so external sources that may impact that winning and that competitive orientation? Coaches. We have a big impact as coaches on our participants. Okay. Parents, another huge group that impact the participant. Okay? Past participation. The media, if the media comes out or media follows or media writes some good stories or bad, can play a part. Friends, and unfortunately, a lot of peer pressure and a lot of what we good-natured ribbing can be taken in a wrong way, and people are now all of a sudden forced to either don't like sport anymore because of they're getting made fun of by their friends, or it pushes them to be more competitive, or some more goal-oriented, or some more win-oriented, right? Enthusiasm, and depth of involvement, past successes, role models, and who they look up to, all play a part in that competitive orientation. That are we focused on game orientation? Are we focused on goal orientation? Or are we focused on win orientation? So there's one thing when we look at competition. So if you're going to have competition, you're going to have an opponent, right? You're going to have somebody that you're competing against or a team that you're competing against. Fraley looked at opponent as an obstacle. Your opponent is a hindrance standing in the way of your goal. Your goal may be winning. Your goal may be being successful. And so your opponent might get in that way and in your way. So your opponent is looked as a hindrance. What does this do? It fosters that domination. You want to dominate your opponent. You want to beat them. Okay? And sometimes it leads to that end justifies the means. I'm going to do whatever it takes to win. Okay? How many times have you heard that? And sometimes that involves hurting the opponent. We had Bountygate several years ago with the Saints, right? And trying to hurt the other team's players so that they could win. Well, that win's going to justify the means that they got there. Opponents' goals are incompatible. So what's their goal? Their goal is to beat you. So that's not compatible with your goal. And can promote more aggressive environment for sport. Fraley said also opponents can be facilitators. Okay, facilitator, help with your success. Competition is activity with rather than against. So we're going to compete with each other, but with that the understanding is that we have to cooperate to be successful. So competition should exist within the spirit of the rules, not going outside the rules, not trying to justify ends justifying the means. Focus on the opponent's best effort rather than domination. Trying to keep up with the opponent's best effort and focusing on the opponent's best effort rather than trying to dominate that opponent. And expresses a less obvious view of the relationship between opponents. Okay? Cooperation here, because you need both sides to, you need that other person to have that competition. So the last thing here to think about is enacting philosophy. How do we put this philosophy, our organization's philosophy, or how an organization puts it into place? And so, one thing is to come up with the player's philosophy. What do they want to get from it? You as the coach or leader within that organization have to set up goals. What are we trying to accomplish through our participation and our participants' participation within our agency? Well-defined organizational structure. Who are the leaders within the organization? Who the athletes actually answer to? Clearly defined program philosophy-based. Clearly defined program philosophy-based programming. So our programming is based upon our philosophy, and it's going to work together. Effective procedures for implementing program, evaluation of all phases, and actually in that evaluation, listening to the expectations of the success and what the success there should be. And then this last slide is how do we apply this? And you can read these, and a lot of them come from including in listening and having disciplinary means. Okay, training your officials, training your coaches, training your parents, okay? All play a very important role.